Somewhere under Georgia, a single shaft drops 586 feet in open free fall, far enough to swallow a 50-story building whole. In Tennessee, a man once walked into a flooded cave, meaning to die. He came out saying he'd been born again, and under a quiet Alabama neighborhood, an entire ecosystem went extinct beneath the feet of the very people sworn to protect it. Most people picture a lit walkway and a handrail and think they've seen these caves, but that railing runs past a stranger map, and almost none of it has ever been reached, mapped, or explained. By the time we reach number 1, you'll understand how the people who knew caves better than anyone on Earth managed to stand directly on top of the one they couldn't save. Number 16. Cathedral Caverns, Alabama. The largest cave entrance in the country still hasn't finished mapping its own back rooms. The mouth of Cathedral Caverns runs 126 feet across and 25 feet tall, a limestone opening so large it's considered a possible world record for a commercial cave. Step onto the lit trail, and the scale keeps climbing. There's Goliath, a stalagmite 45 feet tall and thicker around than most living rooms. There's a 135-foot wall of flowstone, folded like a waterfall caught mid-fall. Pressed into the ceiling is a shark's tooth, left from roughly 400 million years ago, when this part of Alabama was ocean floor. When it opened commercially in the 1950s, it wasn't Cathedral Caverns at all. It was Bat Cave, a blunt working name that matched what hung inside. The rename came only after a new owner's wife stood in the main chamber, looked up, and said it looked like a cathedral. But here's what the paved path doesn't advertise. About 11,000 feet of passage have been formally surveyed beyond the tourist route, and past that point, the cave's full extent has never been confirmed. Cavers pushing those back passages describe crawls and side leads that keep going, into rooms no floodlight has ever reached. And the map just stops, mid-crawl, at the last place a human being has physically been. Number 15. Neversink Pit, Alabama. You have almost certainly seen this place without knowing its name. Neversink is an open-air pit cave, no tunnel required, just a 100-foot wide mouth in the ground, dropping a clean 162 feet to a floor carpeted in ferns. Those ferns survive on a single shaft of daylight that only reaches bottom for a few hours around midday. That's the window photographers wait for. Green ferns lit by one beam of light at the base of a sheer limestone shaft. The image has been reproduced so many times that people who've never set foot in Alabama have still, in effect, stood at that rim. But popularity leaves marks the postcards never show. Rope traffic and boot traffic have worn visible grooves into the rim and the ledges above the drop. The fragile fern beds at the bottom take a beating from every rappeller who lands among them. The conservancy that owns the pit has had to issue permits, cap the number of visitors, and monitor erosion on the very shelves those famous ferns are rooted in. So the picture everyone wants is slowly grinding down the thing worth photographing. And no one has figured out how to keep both. It's a small, quiet irony that repeats across this whole list. The attention that makes a cave famous is often the very force that wears it out. And it's about to get worse, because the next few caves don't just wear down under visitors. They start refusing to let anyone in at all. Number 14. Grand Caverns, Virginia. This one has been selling tickets since 1806, and it still hid half of itself for 200 years. Discovered 2 years earlier, according to local lore, by a teenage trapper chasing a lost raccoon trap into the dark, it is the oldest continuously operating cave in the United States. Inside, past a 70-foot chamber called Cathedral Hall, guides still point out a limestone drapery they call Stonewall Jackson's horse. That name is not just showmanship. During the Civil War, Confederate and Union soldiers both camped near this cave, and more than 200 of them left their names behind, scratched into the limestone or written in candle smoke. Some signatures sit inches apart. Union names beside Confederate names, left by men who might be shooting at each other within days, a few miles up the same valley. And a handful of Confederate names were later found deliberately scratched out. Someone returning to erase the other side long after the smoke had dried. Nobody knows who came back to do it or when. But here's the part that should stop you. In 2004, cavers resurveying the cave squeezed through a passage barely 8 inches high and dropped into 2.8 miles of untouched cave, nearly doubling the known length of a place that had been open to the public since Jefferson's second term. And here's the catch. Almost none of it will ever be walked by a tourist. The new section is fragile, hard to reach, and closed to the public for good, so the half of the cave we only just found is already sealed back off from nearly everyone who will ever visit. The caves so far still hand you a railing to hold. You can drive to them, buy a ticket, walk out by dinner. From here, that stops. The reasons people went into these caves stop being wonder and start being something closer to need, and the ground itself starts closing the doors behind them. Number 13. Russell Cave, Alabama. On the side of a mountain sits a single shelter that human beings used almost without interruption for 10,000 years, and no one can say why they kept choosing it. Not a fort, not a temple, just a dry, defensible spot, 210 feet long, near water and game that generation after generation quietly returned to. Excavations in the 1950s and the 1960s pulled roughly 2 tons of bone, ash, and tool fragments out of that one cave floor. Each layer records the same ordinary habit in a different era. Early hunters relying on the atlatl, a throwing stick that extended a spear's range, switching only much later to the bow. And buried in those layers, researchers found charred goosefoot seeds, suggesting people here were deliberately cultivating plants close to 3,000 years ago, quietly nudging back part of the timeline for early plant use in the eastern woodlands. Stand at the shelter mouth today, and it reads as almost too ordinary to matter. A shallow overhang, a stream, gray light through the trees. That ordinariness is the point. 10,000 years of people chose this exact overhang out of a whole mountain range of them. And every one of them took the reason why to the grave. The layers keep the calendar. The names never made it into the dirt. Number 12. Dunbar Cave, Tennessee. A poured concrete slab still sits flush against this cave mouth outside Clarksville. And for decades, nobody knew what was carved on the walls just inside it. Country star Roy Acuff bought Dunbar Cave in 1948 and turned that slab into a dance floor, booking big band shows that drew crowds from across the region, until home air conditioning made the whole novelty pointless. But centuries before Acuff plugged in a microphone, Mississippian people used this same cave mouth for something with nothing to do with entertainment. Petroglyphs, confirmed by archaeologists only in 2005 and long overlooked, show the cave was treated as an actual entrance to the underworld. In that cosmology, the dark opening wasn't a scenic feature. It was a threshold between worlds. Its cold breath read as something closer to a living presence than a curiosity. One generation danced on the doorstep of the spirit world without ever knowing it was there. And the carvings themselves keep the rest of the secret, because no one alive can read what they were meant to do, or say for certain how old they are. The meaning is still down there on the wall, in a language whose last speaker is long gone. Number 11. Sinks of Gandy, West Virginia. Picture an ordinary mountain meadow where a creek runs across it the way any creek should, and then it simply stops existing. The water disappears into a low limestone mouth and travels roughly 1.5 miles underground, through a passage that in places opens to 100 feet wide before resurfacing on the far side of a mountain spur. The geology of the tunnel is understood well enough. What is not is the land around it. Both entrances sit on private property, uncontrolled and effectively unmapped for outsiders. One of them reportedly sold for millions in recent years without changing any of that. And family history tied to an early landowner holds that part of the cave collapsed generations ago, with someone still inside, a story passed down rather than documented. The hydrology of the creek is certain. What is buried underneath it, and whether anyone ever went in after him, is not, and on locked private land, no outsider has ever been allowed to go and find out. Number 10. Gap Cave, Tennessee, Kentucky, and Virginia. Beneath a mountain, at the exact point where 3 states meet, sits a cave that spent nearly 100 years standing in for a story it had nothing to do with. First described in writing in 1750, it has 6 known entrances, and the passages behind them are wide enough that soldiers once moved through them in numbers. In 1864, a novelist published a tale about a runaway slave hiding in what he called a Cumberland grotto. He had never visited the region and never named this specific cave. 19th century tour operators renamed it Cudjoe's Cave anyway because the fiction sold more tickets than the truth ever had. But the truth holds up fine on its own. Union and Confederate soldiers really did shelter here. At a mountain pass both armies fought to control because whoever held the gap held the road west. Real saltpeter hoppers still stand near the passage. Real candle-smoked names from both armies remain on the walls. Here's what nobody can close the book on. No archaeological trace of the novel's character has ever surfaced, despite decades of people looking, because he was never real to begin with. The cave is still toured today under a borrowed name, and the actual men who sheltered in it, the ones who left real smoke on the ceiling, get remembered under the title of a book that was never about them. Number 9. Ellison's Cave, Georgia. On Pigeon Mountain, a single vertical shaft drops 586 feet in open freefall, deep enough to swallow a 50-story building with room to spare. Cavers call it Fantastic Pit, and it anchors a system with more than 12 miles of mapped passage. The drop is done on a single rope, and rappelling the full length can take the better part of 10 minutes, spinning slowly in the dark with nothing but empty air on every side. Standing at the lip, headlamp aimed down, the beam does not reach the floor. It just runs out. Now, you will hear this called the deepest pit in the country. The honest version is more specific. It is the deepest unobstructed freefall pit in the contiguous United States. The cave as a whole ranks somewhere around 12th deepest by total vertical extent, and no American pit lands anywhere near the world's 50 deepest. That correction quietly resets how extreme Appalachian caving really is on a global scale. And this drop has killed. Several deaths have happened at this exact pit, nearly all tied to gear and rope errors on a fall that punishes them absolutely. A reminder that the most famous hole in Appalachia gives you no second chance to explain your mistake. Number 8. The Lost Sea, Tennessee. America's largest underground lake still doesn't have a confirmed end. The Lost Sea sits 140 feet below ground inside Craighead Caverns, discovered by a 13-year-old boy in 1905, while poking through caves his father used to guide tourists through. Cherokee artifacts and Confederate saltpeter marks survive in the surrounding chambers, alongside 20,000-year-old jaguar tracks pressed into the mud. Visitors today take a guided walk, then a boat ride across roughly 4.5 acres of visible water, giant rainbow trout gliding beneath the hull, fish stocked decades ago that grew unnaturally large in the lightless water and never left. That's the part shown to the public. Cave divers using sonar have mapped room after flooded room beyond it, and still haven't located where the lake actually ends. One diver aimed his sonar into the dark and got nothing back but water in every direction, and had to turn around. So you can buy a ticket to ride across a body of water whose real size nobody has ever measured. It is recognized as the largest underground lake in the United States and the second largest of its kind on Earth, beaten only by a cave in Namibia, while no one has ever confirmed how big it truly is. The caves so far still let you in. You can walk them, photograph them, float across them. What comes next is where the human cost stops being a plaque on the wall and becomes the whole reason the cave is remembered, and where the doors start closing for good, some of them with people's whole life's work sealed on the wrong side. Number 7. Sauta Cave, Alabama. If the caves so far each carried one buried story, the next few carry too many to count. Sauta Cave, once known as Blowing Wind Cave, served as the county's actual courthouse in 1819 and 1820. Decades later, it became a Prohibition-era nightclub, complete with a dance floor built to catch the cold air pouring from the entrance. In the 1960s, the National Guard prepped it as a Cold War fallout shelter. None of that was its darkest chapter. During the Civil War, roughly 60 enslaved men were forced to mine saltpeter here for the Confederate Ordnance Bureau. And the rusted remains of the mining railroad they were made to use still sit inside tunnels, now nicknamed the Catacombs. Today, the same cave is federally protected habitat, sheltering hundreds of thousands of gray bats, and the entrance is gated shut to keep them safe. A courtroom, a dance hall, a forced labor mine, and a bomb shelter, each era certain the cave belonged to it, all the same hole in the ground. And behind that gate, the one thing we most want back is the one thing the cave never kept. The 60 men who dug that saltpeter left their railroad, and not a single one of their names. Number 6. Nickajack Cave, Tennessee. A Cherokee town once stood between this cave and the river, until militia destroyed it in 1794. The cave itself was later mined for saltpeter during the Civil War, and by the early 1900s had become a commercial stop with boat tours and a dance floor near the entrance. Then the water came for it. In 1967, a newly completed dam permanently flooded most of the cave, shrinking an opening that once measured 140 feet wide down to a gap of about 20 feet above the waterline. And that same year, by his own account, a man walked into that cave intending to die. He wandered for hours in total darkness, lay down in the black expecting not to get up, and instead came out saying the experience had turned his life around. That man was Johnny Cash, and he later described the moment as being born again. The same flood that drowned a Cherokee town's shoreline became, for one man, the reason he kept living. And today, the flooded mouth is fenced off, so no one can walk the path he walked back out of. Whatever's left of the old passages, the dance floor, the saltpeter works, the dark he lay down in, sits sealed under the waterline, out of anyone's reach for good. Everything below this point is a locked door. The last few caves aren't sealed by water or by private land. They're sealed on purpose, by the very people who knew them best, because leaving them open would cost more than any view is worth. Number 5. Organ Cave, West Virginia. Union troops once camped directly on top of a Confederate operation and never knew it. Organ Cave, named for a pipe organ-shaped dripstone near its entrance, was mined for saltpeter under Confederate command starting in 1861. Confederate soldiers built 52 wooden hoppers to leach the mineral out of the cave soil. And 37 of them still stand today, some with the original dirt still packed inside, the largest surviving collection of its kind in the country. Robert E. Lee's men held Sunday church services in its chambers while the mining ground on nearby hymns and saltpeter in the same cave at the same hour. While those crews worked underground, Union soldiers camped on the surface directly above, with no idea what was happening beneath their own boots. An entire hidden industry running literally underneath an army that never found out it was there. Miners here also uncovered giant ground sloth bones that were sent to Thomas Jefferson, who examined the great clawed limb personally and first took it for some enormous lion, one of the earliest fossil finds of its kind in the country before science sorted out what he'd actually been holding. But the tour you can take today covers about half a mile. Organ Cave runs to roughly 40 miles of mapped passage, with more than 200 separate leads that have never been surveyed at all, side passages that could run for miles, that nobody has ever followed to the end. The hoppers and the church and the sloth are the part with a walkway. Most of the cave is still dark, still unmeasured, and still waiting. Number 4, Trout Cave, West Virginia. The last stretch leaves human history behind entirely. What's left is deep time and a window into it that its own maker could never physically reach. Some of the best dated Ice Age fossils in the eastern United States came out of this cave system, assembled largely by a man who could barely leave his own home. Layered sediment inside Trout Cave has produced bone deposits dating from roughly 17,000 to 70,000 years old. Porcupine, bobcat, passenger pigeon, each layer radiocarbon dated with unusual precision. The preserve carries the name of paleontologist John Gilday, who led much of the original research. In 1952, Gilday contracted polio, which left him dependent on an iron lung for the rest of his life. He assembled one of the most detailed Ice Age records in Appalachia largely through museum work and correspondence. Relying on field crews to physically reach caves he himself could seldom enter. He became one of the leading vertebrate paleontologists of his era anyway. And there's a strange symmetry to it that nobody quite planned. One of the deepest windows into Ice Age Appalachia was built by a man for whom the caves themselves were sealed shut, not by a gate, but by a machine that kept him breathing. He mapped a world he was never able to walk into. Number 3, Hellhole Cave, West Virginia. A single cave holds close to half the entire global population of one endangered species, and it's been locked shut for over 40 years. Hellhole drops through a 154-foot free-fall entrance shaft, a vertical rope descent just to reach the floor, into a chamber larger than a football field. The name is not marketing. Early cavers looked at that shaft and called it exactly what it looked like. But what matters about Hellhole isn't its size, it's its temperature. The cave stays roughly 10 degrees colder than typical caves in the region, cold enough that bats crowd into it by the tens of thousands to wait out the winter. That makes it one of the largest hibernation sites on Earth for the Virginia big-eared bat, sheltering close to half the entire known population of the species. The math is unforgiving. One bad disturbance, one disease event, one collapse in this single shaft, and a species loses half its world at once. That's why the entrance was fenced shut in 1981 and has stayed closed ever since. Half a species' future currently hangs on a gate nobody has opened in over 40 years, and it will stay that way for the foreseeable future because opening it is the one thing no one can risk. Number 2, Fern Cave, Alabama. Over 1 million bats winter in this single cave, and the people who spent decades mapping it are now shut out too. Fern Cave is a vertical and horizontal maze, dropping 450 feet through 18 separate levels, with 5 known entrances and passages that took cavers years to connect into a single map. Volunteer explorers started working it in the 1960s and kept at it for a generation. It holds the largest wintering gray bat colony in the entire United States, well over 1 million animals folded into the ceilings each cold season. Then, white nose syndrome, the fungal disease that has killed millions of North American bats, was confirmed inside, and the response was to close every entrance. That included the volunteer cavers who had managed the site on the agency's behalf for more than 25 years, the exact people who knew the 18 levels by feel. The maps they drew still exist. The 18 levels still connect the way they charted them. But those charts now describe a place their own makers can no longer enter. Expertise sealed on the wrong side of a gate they helped install. Number 1. Shelta Cave, Alabama. The most biologically diverse cave system ever documented in the United States sits directly beneath what used to be the front door of the organization built to protect every cave on this list. Shelta Cave, in northwest Huntsville, once ran directly under the former headquarters of the National Speleological Society, the same conservation world whose fingerprints are on Neversink's access limits and Fern Cave's locked gates. This was their own backyard. In the late 1960s and early 70s, researchers documented at least 12 cave-dependent species living there together, including 3 distinct crayfish species sharing the same water, a concentration never matched by any other American cave before or since. This was the flagship, the cave the caving world itself chose to own and personally manage. And that ownership is exactly what went wrong. A gate installed to protect the cave turned out to be badly designed for the resident gray bats colony, which abandoned the cave entirely. Without the bats, the nutrients their droppings fed into the water disappeared, and the food chain underneath came apart. Combined with pollution seeping in from the growing city above, the ecosystem collapsed sometime in the early 1970s. The Shelta Cave crayfish, found nowhere else on Earth, was believed extinct for more than 30 years, until 2 lone individuals were confirmed again in 2019 and 2020. The wider ecosystem still hasn't recovered. And to this day, no one can fully explain how the people who understood caves best managed to stand on top of the one they couldn't save. The people who knew these caves best are the ones now locked out, or standing on top of what they couldn't protect, and that, more than any single drop or drowned town, is the real shape of this list. So if you know a cave, a mine, or a hole in the ground near you that the locals keep to themselves, drop it in the comments, because those are the ones we go hunting next. The next one's already waiting for you right there on screen. Let me say one thing, and then I'll leave it alone. Everything you just heard, the sealed gates, the drowned towns, the names scratched into limestone by men who left them nowhere else on Earth, none of it came from a brochure. I've spent years pulling these out of survey reports and old caving logs, and the stories the locals only tell each other, the ones that never make the plaque at the trailhead. I put the best of them, the ones there was never room for in a video, into a book called The Appalachian Mysteries Collection. It's down in the description if you want to go where the railing ends.